Hi, this is Laura French, and a few people had asked for a recorded version of the presentation on Willa Cather that I did on her 150th birthday on December 7th. And so here it is. We chose this photo of Willa Cather that you see here, which is not the one you're usually used to seeing. But it is going to be important as we go through this presentation to remember that Willa Cather was very young when she visited Brownville. She was only about 20 years old, a rising senior at UNL. And so this is a good image to keep in your mind as we go through. You'll see pictures of the mature, confident Willa Cather later in the presentation, but this is closer to how she looked when she was actually in Brownville. And as I say, the presentation is going to focus on her visit to Brownville, but we're going to talk about more generally about Willa Cather and maybe share some things that you didn't know. Willa Cather, as we will see, was no stranger to controversy. And so I'm going to start with a statement that may be sort of controversial. And that is, Willa Cather was not a Nebraska author. And I say that for two reasons. The first is Willa Cather was born in Virginia. She was born in the Shenandoah Valley, December 7th, 1873. Remember that date. This is her actual birthplace in Virginia, which has just been purchased this year for preservation. And I think it kind of needs it, and I wish them the best with that. The Cather family had been Union sympathizers during the Civil War. After the war, things were not necessarily smooth for them. And so there was a mysterious fire at some point in one of the outbuildings, and that was kind of the last straw. And so Willa and her family moved to Nebraska, where some other family members had already settled in Red Cloud. She revisited her family roots toward the end of her life with a story called Sapphira and the Slave Girl. That's actually about a woman who helped an enslaved person escape. And her grandmother was the inspiration for that novel. Willa Cather was born in Virginia. She's buried in Jaffrey, New Hampshire. She spent every fall in Jaffrey from 1917 until 1940. She said, all my best books were written in Jaffrey, New Hampshire, in a little room where I could almost touch the ceiling with my hand. One of those books that was written in Jaffrey, New Hampshire was My Antonia. And in 1972, Edith Lewis was buried alongside her. They had been together as friends, editor, partners for almost 40 years at that point. And so this is Willa Cather's tombstone in New Hampshire. And the quote that I think is quite lovely is, "That is happiness, to be dissolved into something complete and great." And note here the date of birth, December 7th, 1876. At some point, Willa Cather shaved 3 years off her age, but we're pretty sure that 1873 is the real date of birth. But the good news is we can do another 150th birthday party in 3 years if we want to. Notable works. Song of the Lark starts in Colorado, but it's also set in Chicago, New York, Germany, Santa Fe. Death Comes for the Archbishop is set in New Mexico. Sapphira and the Slave Girl, as I just mentioned, is set in Virginia. Oh Pioneers is set in Nebraska, but she was in Pittsburgh when she wrote it. My Antonia is set in Nebraska, but she was in New Hampshire when she wrote it. So again, to call her a Nebraska author geographically is challenging, but there's another reason that I want to say Willa Cather is not a Nebraska writer. Very often when there is any sort of modifier before the word writer, woman writer, children's book writer, mystery writer. What you're saying is that it's not real literature, it's some lesser form, and Nebraska writer can kind of mean a sort of a regional scope. And Willa Cather is definitely not limited in scope to any state, any country, any era. This is a partial list of the celebrations that have happened over the past year of Willa Cather's 150th birthday. On September 27th, Ken Burns presents Willa Cather's America in New York. And I would have loved to have heard that because it was narrated by David Strathairn, who is one of the great narrative voices. In Brownville, we celebrated Willa Cather. She was also celebrated. This is one I would have liked to have seen. Willa Cather's sesquicentennial celebration, an hour of readings from Willa Cather's work and Truman Capote's description of his chance meeting with his favorite author. I do not see Willa Cather and Truman Capote together. That would have been interesting. Anyway, she was celebrated in New Mexico back in November, in Pittsburgh, where she worked for a long time, as we'll see in a minute. And if I had not been doing the presentation at the community building in Stella, Nebraska, I would definitely have been in Lincoln for Oh Pie and Beers at the Zipline Brewing Company on her actual birthday of December 7th. So I think we don't quite realize in Nebraska how widely known and widely celebrated Willa Cather is, and that can only be a good thing. She was honored during her lifetime. She got an honorary doctorate from UNL, one of the first two women to receive one. She got the Pulitzer Prize in 1923. She was the fourth novelist to receive the award, and two of the previous prizes had gone to Booth Tarkington. So in a way, she was the third person to get it, I guess. She got America's 12 Greatest Women recognition from Good Housekeeping in 1931, and she was the first woman to receive an honorary doctorate from Princeton. And the New York Times wrote, although the list of notables so honored includes Charles Lindbergh, Frank Kellogg, and Newton D. Baker, the conferring of the degree of Doctors of Letters upon Willa Cather, the novelist, seemed to attract the greatest attention from those present. And this is a picture of her with the president of Princeton University. And that, again, is much more how we think of Willa Cather as a mature and confident woman. She liked getting honorary doctorates. She was not that wild about the Good Housekeeping recognition because she got lots and lots of mail from women asking all kinds of questions about managing, their households and their children and their husbands. And that was really not Willa Cather's interest at all. So again, having seen that mature picture, important to remember that this is closer to how Willa Cather looked when she came to Brownville, Nebraska. This picture is a couple years younger, but certainly closer to her age than the picture we just saw of her with the president of Princeton. So Willa Cather came to Brownville in the summer of 1894, presumably the age of 20, because she hadn't yet shaved the 3 years off. She came on assignment from the Nebraska State Journal, which was a daily newspaper based in Lincoln. And the assignment was to write about Brownville at 40. So Brownville was founded in 1854. Cather was there in 1894. And eventually the article that was published was called An Old River Metropolis. She came down accompanied by her brother Roscoe, who was very close to her, and a university pal named Marielle Gear, who took photos. And we'll hear more about those photos in a minute. So again, remember, she's 20 years old. She's 3 years removed from Red Cloud, Nebraska. And yet the writing is just amazing. It is almost unheard of to find a town in Nebraska that has a past. It is sometimes rather difficult to find one that has a present, though all of them have, or think they have, a future. And here's her description of the physical place that I think we can all picture who have been to Brownville. Brownville is built in a little horseshoe-shaped gulch. Behind and on either side of it rise the high wooded bluffs, and in front of it flows the Yellow River. Across the river run the bluffs with intervals of green meadowland, and back of the town, over the ridge of the hills, lie the rich orchards and fruit farms for which Nemaha County is noted. The site looks out over 4 states, across the river, Missouri and Iowa, on this side, Nebraska and Kansas. But now here is her thesis. This is what she's going to be telling us in the article. It does not take one long to see that the town has been what it is not. It is as though there had once been a high tide of prosperity there, and when it went out, it had left for its watermarks rows of ruined houses and stranded homes. Even the Lone Tree Saloon is falling to pieces, and that in a Western town is the sure sign that everything is gone. And if you've been to Brownville lately, you know that the Lone Tree Saloon, which is now a gift shop, is in great shape again. It is different from other towns because it was the birthplace of a new and great commonwealth. So this is what she's going to keep saying. Brownville has this majestic past, but it doesn't have much of a present. So, but much as Brownville has lost, it has retained something which most towns in the state do not have, a history. It has great traditions of which any town might be proud. It is different from other towns because it was the birthplace of a new and great commonwealth. In an upstairs room of Senator Tipton's big house on the hill was stretched the first telegraph wire that linked Nebraska with the civilization of the East and made it a part of the big world. Down in the ravine are the ruins of the building in which ex-Governor Furness and Chester Langdon printed the first newspaper ever issued in the territory. And Governor Furness, who turns 150 in 2024, and there will be celebrations, founded both the Nebraska Farmer and the Nebraska Advertiser. And so he was a journalist among many other interests that he held. And here is that what they're going to call the lightning line, the first telegraph in what is still pretty recognizably Main Street of Brownville, I think. So the first telegram that she references was sent on August 29th of 1860, and it was sent by Governor Furness to the Associated Press because he was a journalist, and so he had those connections. And he says, Nebraska sends greetings to the states. The telegraph line was completed to this place today, and the first office in Nebraska formally opened. Our citizens are jubilant over the event and now realize the advantage of being connected with their Eastern friends and the rest of mankind by means of a lightning line. Onward. And the only line that Cather quoted was westward the star of empire takes its way. And the telegram is signed citizens, although written by Governor Furness. So there's a little bit more. What she quotes is this very lofty language, but as soon as that official telegram was sent, Governor Furness sent a follow-up to his friends at the St. Joseph Gazette. The Advertiser sends greeting. Give us your hand, hot as blazes, thermometer 104 in the shade. What's news? R.W. Furness. And the editor of the St. Joseph paper sent a telegraph back. We are most happy to return your greeting. Thermometer at 100 and rising like H blank blank L. You ask for the news. Douglas stock fully up to the thermometer and rising as rapidly. St. Joe drinks Nebraska's health. I'm assuming St. Joe stock fully up to the thermometer means that they were not expecting Abraham Lincoln to win the upcoming election, but he did. And the rest, as they say, is history. So the thing that I learned from doing this presentation that I found most amazing is Brownville happened because of the steamboat trade. And when the steamboat trade went under, it carried Brownville with it. That's Cather. And so this is some background on what that really meant. The Nebraska Advertiser noted that the steamboat Edinburgh left the largest lot of goods of the season at the Brownville Wharf. Just one firm had left freight amounting to over $1,000. And this is in, a long time ago. This is 1858. In 1857, the Nebraska Advertiser declared no trade in the United States and possibly in the world employed as many steamboats as the Missouri River. Now, this is, of course, Nebraska Advertiser, headquartered in Brownville, Nebraska, but they had some information to back it up. 46 steamboats measuring 29,300 tons and valued at $1,267,000 had gone through, and a dozen new boats were under construction. And then in 1857, also about, I would assume, halfway through the season, 130 steamboats had docked at the Brownville Wharf, usually landing both passengers and freight at almost every arrival. And those of us who have taken the cruise on the riverboat Queen from the dock in Brownville down the river might picture, the steamboat lands and people kind of traipse down the dock, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking again about huge loads of freight on each of these steamboats and really amazing compensation. So captains received about $200 a month. And again, this is back in the 1860s. Clerks, 150, mates, 125, engineers about the same as mates, and they got room and board. So this was just strictly spending money. And the pilot divided the profits with the owner and sometimes received the larger share. He was the aristocrat of the boat and absolutely controlled her navigation. His wages were sometimes as much as $1,200 a month, and he spent it like a thoroughbred. And if you look at the seal of the state of Nebraska, there, by golly, is a steamboat. We see the train going north, as the train sort of did, although I don't know why there are mountains north, but and we see industry and farming and orchards, but definitely that steamboat was part of Nebraska's history. So that's how it had been in the 1870s. Cather is here in 1894, and again is portraying this present of Brownville as being really desolate. On the little hill to the east stands the Episcopal Church, where the elite of ancient Brownville met to worship. The ruin and neglect of the place is pitiful. The stained glass windows are broken in, the walls black with the litter of mold, the carpet white with plaster fallen from the ceiling, the prayer benches broken and the curious, probably curtains, torn. The bishop's chair warped and split, the altar cloth so moth-eaten that it scarcely holds together, the Bible swollen and blistered by rain, and even the white marble cross shattered before the altar. Over the door is painted in gold, "Peace be within thy walls." Well, there is peace enough, and there is likely to be, as long as the walls hold together. And this Episcopal Church, by the way, is on the site where the Brownville Concert Hall now stands, which brings in wonderful performers 9 times a year and has for, I think they're going into their 53rd season, 34th, I don't remember. I get the theater and the concert hall confused, but if you're wondering where this Episcopal church stood that she is talking about, that was the site. It's not the same church, but that was the site. The only person I met who seemed to me to be at all above the dead level was a young girl who even dared to laugh and make jokes at the old town. But when I noticed an unusually large diamond on her third finger and heard her singing Gounod's waltz song from Romeo and Juliet to a caller that night in the dark, I understood her elation and reckless indifference. I suppose one could be desperately in love even in Brownville. So that was, those are some excerpts from the article she wrote for the Lincoln paper. And so now we'll talk a little bit about the aftermath. She wrote a letter to Grace Brody, who lived in Brownville at the time. And back in October, I had inadvertently repeated an urban legend that Cather ordered all of her letters destroyed when she died. That's not true. And in fact, the Cather Foundation has gathered, I think 900 of them so far, and they are wonderfully annotated so that you can search by people's names and dates and topics and all kinds of things. So this is a letter in Willa Cather's handwriting to Grace Brody that she wrote August 29th, which is just, a few weeks after her visit. So remember, she said the ruin and neglect of the place is pitiful, talking about the Episcopal Church. Didn't the pictures come out in great shape? The Episcopal interior was the best one after all, and those prayer benches we wickedly piled up in the aisle showed up in great shape. So in other words, what the photos showed that were actually turned into line art of this rack and ruin was something that they had done themselves. And in fact, the Episcopal Church was still in use as a house of worship in 1894. Did we mention that Willa Cather was young when she came to Brownville? So that's why that picture that you can keep in your mind is so important. And here is my favorite line from all of Willa Cather. This is the letter that she sent to her friend Grace. I send you a glowing clipping from the Auburn Granger. Don't they give it to me, though? I'm afraid we will have to give up our autumn excursion down there, for they would probably drive us all out of town and would certainly mob me and hang me without a trial. After this, I will get all I can out of a town my first visit, for it is very evident that I can never visit the same town twice. And then she sort of apologizes if this has caused any backlash for Grace. But if you go down to the third paragraph, did you have a pleasant time out at Miss Plaster's? I hope she is not wroth with me. And that Miss Plaster's, in fact, was my grandfather's Aunt Nellie. And so there is my 3 degrees of separation from Willa Cather. I see that our friend Miss Schertz is married. She struck me as an awfully nice girl. I can't help but wonder if that's the woman who was laughing at the town and singing from Romeo and Juliet on the balcony. And then she says, Roscoe and I played cards last night with that memorable Brownville deck, but the memories of soapy candy that clung about them were too much for me, and I was ingloriously beaten. And I'm wondering about soapy candy, wondering if that was divinity, which always seemed kind of soapy to me. So here's a completely different view of these young people. Didn't we have lots of fun down there, though? So they played cards, they ate candy, they had a good time, they went to the church, they kind of piled up some things so that she could write her story about the woeful state of Brownville. And it was definitely a better story, right? So, and again, a little bit of information about my grandfather's aunt, Nellie that I assume that should be Angelina. Nobody ever got that name right. Was an American nurse, born to David and Angelina Plasters in Brownville, Nebraska. And if you go to what is called the Captain Bailey House, that is the Nebraska Historical Museum, that actually was David and Angelina Plasters' house, and a lot of pictures of them in the front entry. And Macinich is a name that you will now see on the Wheel Museum in downtown Brownville, because he had the car dealership in Brownville in later years. So 3 years after she wrote the article that was published in the Lincoln newspaper, she wrote a short story called Resurrection. And that was published in April 1897, so just 3 years later, in Home Monthly. And that magazine was located in Pittsburgh. Willa Cather moved there and became the first managing editor just shortly after she finished college. It was called an idiosyncratic woman's magazine for women seeking broader knowledge within conventional lives. Its motto was to entertain, to educate, to elevate. And clearly here, Cather learned to write for an audience. She had things in the magazine almost every month, sometimes anonymously, so that it wouldn't be clear quite how much she was contributing. But remember, she wrote, "I am used to wrath. I seldom get anything else," after her experience of writing the story on Brownville. But clearly, by the time she does the short story version, she had matured and mellowed. Now she writes, well, no, wait, this is the article she wrote when for the Lincoln paper. Brownville was not always the sleepy, deserted town it is today, full of empty buildings and idle men, and of boys growing up without aim or purpose. It was the first town built on the Nebraska side of the river, and there, sheltered by the rugged bluffs and washed by the restless Missouri, a new state struggled into existence and proclaimed its right to be. But when she wrote Resurrection, the short story, she put the same idea this way: the present population of Brownville is composed mostly of river folks and a nondescript people who have come up the river from nowhere. People of heavy caliber do not settle in a deserted village. The people who live there now are the usual river town population. They moved in and married the washerwomen and servant girls of the old residents, and bought the big houses for a song, and cut down the great cedars and oaks in the yard for firewood, and plowed up the terraces for a potato patch, and are contented in the manner of their kind. So by 1897, she's putting that in terms of character. She says, there are plenty of living masterpieces that are as completely lost to the world as the lost 9 books of Sappho, or as the Grecian marbles that were broken under the barbarians' battle axes. The world is full of waste of this sort. And the main characters in Resurrection definitely are noble, likable, caring people who just have kind of been dealt difficult hands in life. In 1894, she said, the boys run away from school to go fishing and swimming, and they know nothing but the river. The only ambition they are ever guilty of is that vague yearning which stirs in the breasts of all river boys to go down the river into the big world someday, clear down as far as the river goes, but they never go. And by 1897, she has invented a character who has known something more, is now kind of stuck in Brownville, and says, in fact, Miss Margie, I've got something to tell you. You know, for a long time, I've thought I'd like to quit the ferry and get somewhere where I'd have a chance to get ahead. There's no use trying to get ahead in Brownville, for there's nothing to get ahead of. Of late years, I wanted to get a job on the lower Mississippi again on a boat, you know? That is the story of Willa Cather's visit to Brownville. And I want to thank everybody who came to see it when we did it live. And thank you to anybody who watches the recording.